across the Bering Straits and down into these continents is the accepted scientific truth now about where the American Indians did come from. Shortly after publishing the Book of Mormon, Joseph and his friends formed officially the Mormon Church in 1830, and subsequently, as it began to grow, moved around the eastern part of the United States several times. I wish I had more time to give you some of that background because it is a very interesting history, and the growth of the Mormon Church was an incredible phenomena in its day and time. And they eventually ended up in Illinois and started to build a large city there called Nauvoo, which was the second largest city in Illinois at the time, second only to Chicago. And the Mormons were feared everywhere they went because they had a voting bloc that was very powerful, and they often went into communities and with the attitude that they had a divine right from God to come into a community and pretty much take it over. And a lot of the history that most members of the church don't understand or have never heard is how often the Mormons did illegal things. They raided people's farms and ranches for cattle. They took over businesses. They made nuisances of themselves often wherever they went. And this was where the persecution came from, and they were persecuted for many, many years. It was because they made people angry. And they eventually ended up in Nauvoo, and then eventually Joseph Smith did some things there, including the polygamy thing, which I'll talk a little bit more later, that angered a lot of people, and he ended up burning down a building and destroying the printing press of what they would have, in this day and age, we call the Willamette Week of Nauvoo, which only had one issue, and in that issue it exposed, these were some of his closest people who had worked with him who published this, trying to expose the polygamy thing that was still being kept secret, and also a lot of financial scams and scandals that Joseph and his closest friends had been involved in. And when this came out, it was circulated around Nauvoo. Joseph had a unique group of people who were called the Danites, and I'm going to talk about them later, who took it upon themselves at his instruction to go in and destroy that printing press and burn the building down. And it was for that reason he was arrested. It was not because of polygamy that he was arrested. At the final arrest, he had been arrested many times before, including as a young man for his money digging and scamming type of activities he did when he was an older teenager. But he was taken to jail, and eventually an angry mob came to the jail, and he and his brother were killed. And of course he became a martyr to the Mormons, and is very highly revered by the Mormons. And Joseph was a very interesting person. He was very charismatic. I've read many, many accounts how both men and women literally fell in love with Joseph almost immediately after meeting him. He was evidently a charismatic speaker, and he was a warm person, and he was extremely revered and extremely loved by a lot of the people of his day. One of the things that did happen along the way is that he began to live a polygamous life, and he kept this secret for many, many years. His wife would find evidence of it, and they would have women come to their home, and then she'd end up kicking them out. And this went on and off for about 10 years. He engaged a small handful of other men in this, and it was all kept secret for about 10 years. And then finally he was forced to acknowledge it. And this caused great divisions among the church and a lot of apostasy from the church at the time, as these Christian people just could not fathom this lifestyle. And at some point then, Joseph came forward and said and told his people that he had a revelation 10 years before that he was to take multiple wives, and that it was necessary to have multiple wives in order to obtain the highest degree in heaven, because the Mormons break heaven down into different degrees. It isn't just heaven and hell. So in order to be in that upper echelon, you had to have multiple wives. And that women had to participate in polygamy if they ever hoped to attain that upper echelon also. So that was the history, and from that point forward, I know today that there are many, many younger members of the Mormon Church who do not know or believe that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. They believe that Brigham Young is the one who started it, but it was well on its way before they went to Utah. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Danites. The Danites were a group of people, men, who were formed at some point along the way to help protect Joseph Smith and to carry out some of the deeds that he didn't want his name on, or he didn't want to be coming officially from the church. There is ample historical evidence now that they were involved in a lot of illegal activities, including murder. And the church historians will and even today will attempt to say that it was a very small group of men, and it was kind of an ad hoc group who went about their business without Joseph Smith knowing about it. And if I had time, I would read you quotes from Joseph Smith written in his own hand, where it's obvious that he helped organize them, did know about them, and often gave them assignments to carry out. But again, in the church, it's not, that is a piece of history that I know I never heard growing up. And it was only after I started doing research as an adult that I found out about them. This group of what they call Danites, coming from some scripture called the Sons of Dan, that's found in the Bible, I don't know where that is. But they were definitely still operative when they went to Utah. And there's many stories about some of the things that happened there also that they were involved in. Some of you may be aware of a huge event in American history which has been completely ignored for 150 years, and that's a horrific massacre that happened at a place called Mountain Meadows. And what happened there was a wagon train was coming through Utah. I have read historical accounts that say it was probably the most wealthy wagon train that ever came west. They had a huge amount of cattle. They had not only wagons, but very expensive buggies. They had horses. They had a lot of food supply and so forth. And at some point, as they came through Utah, the rumors were started that they were boasting that they had a hand in killing Joseph Smith, some of the members of the party, and also a hand in killing Parley P. Pratt, who was an apostle of Brigham Young's, who had been murdered back east. I can't remember what state it was in. The church teaches that he was, murdered by anti-Mormons for no good reason. The reason he was murdered was that he had stolen somebody's wife and moved her and her 3 kids to, I believe it was somewhere in Illinois, away from this man who had lost his wife and his children to this man so she could be a polygamous wife to Parley Pratt. And it was this man who tracked him down finally and murdered him. Again, I never heard that. I probably was 40 years old before I ever discovered the real reasons Parley